Hey guys, so this is my review for Oppenheimer. So of course I was gonna see this in theaters because Interstellar is one of my favorite movies of all time, and Christopher Nolan wrote Man of Steel, or helped write Man of Steel, so of course one of my other favorite movies of all time, and so of course I was gonna watch this. And but yeah, I'm gonna start with like the plot, and I'm gonna get into my thoughts and like a lot of some facts, background facts, if you don't already know, based on articles from interviews from Nolan. Yeah, the movie starts out. It follows Robert J. Oppenheimer, aka the father of the atomic bomb. It's played by Cillian Murphy, and I would say that great casting. I mean, if you actually look at real Oppenheimer, they have very much similar structures, face structure, and they're very like thin in the face, so I think it was great casting. So yeah, Oppenheimer has just finished his PhD in physics at the University of Göttingen. I think that's German. So yeah, he returned to the U.S. After this, so that he could start teaching quantum physics, because quantum physics is a new science, and America doesn't have any institutions or schools that teach quantum physics. So he's started teaching at the University of California, Berkeley, but he also spends time at Caltech. And we get a little bit about a lot of the people, relationships he's had with people. He knows a lot of famous people, or he's famous in the science world. He has an acquaintance with Ernest Lawrence. He won the Nobel Prize for his practical applications of physics. So yeah, in this movie, we get him. He's a colleague of Oppenheimer's, and he is the one that, after they discover the splitting of the atom, Oppenheimer doesn't believe that it's possible because he's a theoretical physicist, and so it's all about math, and math doesn't show that this is possible, but he's actually able to replicate it in the lab setting. And so yeah, he's the one who won the Nobel Prize for his focus on it, applying actual using real world applications to test all these theories, I guess you could say. And he also has a relationship. And we see other people that he's interacted with that get him in hot water with the government, because in this time period, they were very much, Red Scare, the whole fear of communism, and Oppenheimer associated with a lot of communists, and he said he wasn't an actual communist. I guess you could say he appreciates different, learning about as many ideologies as possible, and he doesn't necessarily agree with them, but yeah, he gets in trouble because he keeps associating with communists. And I believe he also kept trying to unionize like the students there, the labs there, and so he also, something else that he got in trouble for, of course, because it's America and we suck. One of the people that he ends up meeting, her name is Jean Totlock, played by Florence Pugh. He had a romantic relationship with, but it was kind of on and off. She didn't really want to have a serious relationship with him, whereas he wanted one, but it never worked out, and ultimately she ends up committing suicide. And then of course we also meet Caroline Puning, played by Emily Blunt, who he eventually marries. She was originally married to, she was a common law wife to a communist activist when she ends up meeting Oppenheimer. And I just think those fucking laws are dumb as shit. You know, the laws where if a woman lives with a man long enough, she's considered his wife. So fucking stupid. So, but yeah, we also meet Leslie Groves, played by Matt Damon, but he approaches Oppenheimer about the becoming the head of the Manhattan Project after World War II starts, and there's a whole fear that Nazis will create a bomb first, and so he approaches Oppenheimer, and he eventually agrees, and so they have like this really interesting relationship because Leslie Groves is military and Oppenheimer is a scientist, and you know, they have to kind of I guess have to learn to work together. He could be kind of a dick in this movie, but ultimately at the end he had Oppenheimer's back, so ultimately he was tolerable. But yeah, so Oppenheimer becomes the head of the Manhattan Project, and they gather all these scientists together to you know, create the bomb. And of course we have a lot of like conflict because we have all these different personalities together, a lot of egos coming together and clashing. And yeah, one of them was Teller, aka a biggest dick in the movie. Well, not the biggest, but he is a dick. Teller's the actual, guy is an asshole. But yeah, so they bring all these scientists together at Los Alamos, New Mexico, and we start, throughout the movie they are questioning kind of the dangers of, creating this bomb, the moral implications of it, and, but ultimately, as Oppenheimer stated, he doesn't like, I think he said he doesn't like America having a bomb, but he doesn't like Nazis having it more, something along those lines. The only reason that they're doing this is because of the Nazis. And so, because also his colleague, he ends up meeting in Germany. He becomes the lead scientist for the Nazis creating the bomb, and so they have an 18-month head start on the bomb because of having this brilliant scientist heading their division. But Oppenheimer says that they're going to be creating the bomb first. America is going to be able to create the bomb first because of anti-Semitism. So essentially, because of Hitler's view on Jews, it pretty much drove all the scientists away out of Germany, and they eventually come together to bring the bomb, create the bomb. So, yeah. Eventually, the Germans surrender before the bomb gets completed, but they decide, or the military, America, the government decides to go ahead with it because the Japanese have not surrendered yet. And of course, I think they just wanted the bomb that they can use to scare others, because they're also kind of having like issues with the Soviet Union, and this is like the time period before the Cold War. So yeah, we eventually get the final testing of the bomb in the middle of the desert, and the testing was called the Trinity test. And so we get to see how they set it up, and they had to wear like sunscreen, and they had to wear eyeglasses. They couldn't actually look directly at it. They had to look at it through like a mirror, so that obviously they didn't blind themselves. And that scene was actually really cool because you see the bomb hit, or you see the bomb blow up, and it's you see the giant explosion, and for like an entire minute or two, it's nothing. We don't hear anything, and then I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for the shockwave, and eventually we get the shockwave, and it's literally like bombs exploded right next to you. It was so loud. So that scene was very well done. Very impactful. But yeah, they complete the Trinity test, and so they go ahead and create 2 bombs. And then we have the scene where he's on pins and needles because he's trying to, they're kind of keeping him out of the loop as to what's going on with the dropping of the bombs. And so he's just waiting for someone to call him to let them know if it was successful, what happened. And so eventually we hear on the radio that they dropped the 2 bombs. And then we kind of get more into the effects of that. The scientists are informed on the effects that the bomb has on Japan. So talking about how people were pretty much disintegrated in the middle of the street. People's clothes were melted to their skin, and then even the people who ultimately survived the blast, were dying weeks later for no apparent cause. And of course now we also know that it's also caused genetic defects for the survivors as well for future generations. So ultimately terrifying. And we kind of get, like right after the Trinity test, Oppenheimer is kind of realizing what he's done, because they're in like this hall and they're celebrating, and he's given this like, this propaganda speech, if you will, to them. But the entire time, he's kind of, I guess you could say, dissociating, because it's pretty much just this like distorted scene. It's solely focused on his face, and everything's blurred, and there's just like this distorted noise. And as he's talking, he's like seeing people's faces around them, and they're like melting, and he steps onto a burnt corpse, and so he's kind of realizing what he's done and what the effects, these effects are going to be because of the creation of the atomic bomb. He eventually ends up meeting Hoover, who, of course, I think it was Hoover anyway, either Hoover or Truman, whichever, and they were a piece of trash, essentially, because Oppenheimer was kind of devastated about the effects of the bomb. He wants he doesn't want any more bombs to be created, but Hoover or Truman calls him, I thought he had called him a crybaby, because he actually has feelings instead of as a heartless douchebag. But actually it's based on an actual conversation with the president, and I think the actual word he used was cretin. So yeah, president is a dick. Surprised. Yeah, and so this is where we kind of get in the turning point, I think, for the rest of Oppenheimer's life, because he essentially spends the rest of his life trying to prevent any more nuclear programs from proceeding. So he doesn't want any more bombs to be created. And so, yeah, he talks a lot to Congress and petitions, stuff like that. And ultimately, this leads to this event where there's this politician. I can't remember exactly what his position is, but Oppenheimer essentially publicly humiliated him, and so he essentially made it his life mission to ruin Oppenheimer. And so, using his position, he puts all his cronies in power and finds all the weasels that have a grudge against Oppenheimer, and trying to convince people that Oppenheimer is a communist. Obviously, Oppenheimer is kind of a celebrity in America, so he's wanting them to actually get his security clearance revoked, so that I guess he can no longer work in like any of the labs or something like that. But so yeah, so Louis Strauss, played by Robert Downey Jr. I'm not sure if I said that, but yeah, we get that's pretty much the entire like last third of the scene was the hearings. And I mean, that's when I kind of started, like, it started losing me, not because it's necessarily bad, but because I don't like conflict at all, and there's a lot of yelling, a lot of accusations, and it just started, I guess, triggering me, and I just started blocking it out, and so, yeah. Yeah, and I think, well, eventually I'll just tell you what happens first. He's having the hearing, and he's being interrogated essentially by the United States Atomic Energy Commission, and he eventually does get his security clearance revoked. But there is another hearing, because about like whether Louis Strauss used his position to pretty much go after Oppenheimer because he had a grudge against him. And there was a lab technician who testified that Strauss did in fact have a grudge against Oppenheimer and used his position to fuck over Oppenheimer. And he ultimately, because of this hearing, Strauss was denied a cabinet position by the Senate. So thankfully this douche nozzle got some of his comeuppance. But one of my favorite scenes was with Emily Blunt, because her character, his wife was very, I guess you could say, a spitfire. She got so angry because he would not fight them, but, you know, Oppenheimer just came off as the kind of introvert. He was more quiet, and, you know, he was kind of just martyring himself, and he made his wife so mad. But he ultimately still wants her to come be questioned by the commission. And he talks about how, you know, you might not understand it, but you know, I want it, or something like that. And we do get her. And my God, she roasted that fucker. Oh, that scene was beautiful. Emily Blunt was, you know, he kept trying to use loaded questions to catch her in a trap, so that he could essentially fuck over Oppenheimer. And man, she was not falling for it. There's this one like bit where he keeps asking her a question, and she's like, "I don't like your question," and he's like, keeps asking her, "I don't like your question," and she pretty much points out how it's phrased in such a way that he's trying to entrap her. And so, oh, that scene was so climactic, or cathartic, I guess. And we get later on, at the end of the movie, we get Oppenheimer when he's probably 60s or 70s. He's starting to lose his hair, and he obviously looks older. The makeup is great in this movie. I'm just FYI. But she, Teller, he's one of the douche nozzles that testified against Oppenheimer because he has a grudge against him. But he, Oppenheimer shakes his hand because, you know, that's just the guy he is. But he tries to shake Kitty's, that's his wife's name, her nickname. And my God, I thought that she was gonna deck him. She was just if looks could kill. But it was just so enjoyable. I think Emily Blunt was one of my favorite characters in this movie. So yeah. So yeah, anyways, kind of combobulated, I guess, but it's more of a character look at Oppenheimer as opposed to this really action heavy, look at, the creation of the atomic bomb. So I did not realize that there was going to be a sex scene, because when I was just watching it and then suddenly bombarded with Florence Pugh's tits. Not complaining, but it was a surprise to say that. So a little bit about like the actual people this movie is based on. I've been trying to learn a little bit more about physics, chemistry, and stuff like that. So I was kind of trying to figure out which people I was familiar with, which was kind of fun. It was really exciting when some of it actually leaks into your brain. You actually absorb some of it. So Niels Bohr, I recognized him. He was a Danish physicist who he won the Nobel Prize in 1922 in physics because he furthered our understanding of the atomic structure and the quantum theory. He was played by Kenneth Branagh. He's the guy who plays Lockhart in Harry Potter. And so Edward Tiller, I mentioned him before. He was an asshole. He's actually remembered as the father of the hydrogen bomb. So he was the one who discovered that you can use hydrogen. I think it makes a bigger bomb, essentially. It has a bigger explosion, bigger impact. And so yeah, he was essentially the government's bitch. He, worked with the military and developed pretty much every weapon they wanted. So Richard Feynman, I recognized him. He's still, I think he's still alive, but one of the modern physicists. And Enrico Fermi, of course, Werner Heisenberg. He was the head of the Nazis' atomic program, and Oppenheimer actually did know him, and he knew that because Heisenberg was the head of the Nazi vision, then they had to create the bomb because he was going to. Anyways, I did not realize at first that it's played by Matthias Herver. I hope I said that right. He is Hans from Army of the Dead and Army of Thieves. So I did not know he was going to be in this movie, and I recognized him, and I do like that he's getting work on, some big movies. And of course, Gary Oldman plays Truman, another role of Gary Oldman's. I don't recognize him. They really do change him when they, when he plays roles. So a little bit about the background to this movie. So this was actually based on the 2005 biography American Prometheus by Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin. So of course, once another book I have to put on my list that hopefully I'll read eventually, because I think it would be fascinating. It was produced by Emma Thomas, who I found out is actually Christopher Nolan's wife. And much like the Snyders, they work on pretty much every one of their movies together. So she's produced pretty much all his movies. And then Charles Robin, he also has worked on most of Christopher Nolan's movies. Cinematography was by Heit von Hoytema. It was a dude, right? I don't know. He did Interstellar, so of course, beautiful movie. Beautiful effects in this movie as well. Editor was Jennifer Lame, who did the editing for Hereditary, Tenet, Black Panther 2. So a lot of big names, well respected people who worked on, really well respected movies. Composer was Ludwig Göransson. He did both of the Black Panther movies, and I have to listen to the entire soundtrack by itself, but the scenes with the bombs, just so beautiful, kind of haunting, especially at the very last scene. The music was very heavy and loud and epic, and so yeah, this is a good score, from what I remember. And so yeah, those were people that worked on the movie, behind the scenes. So if you don't already know, if you haven't heard, this was Nolan's first movie that he's worked with another studio besides Warner Brothers. He worked with Universal for this movie, because Warner Brothers pissed him off so much that he decided to no longer work with them. So that's how fucked up Warner Brothers has become. They literally drove away one of the most popular, well-respected directors in the industry today. Christopher Nolan wrote the script. He wrote it from the first-person point of view, so from Oppenheimer's point of view. He wanted to represent Oppenheimer's feelings in a delayed manner, because Nolan doesn't think that people really, the consequences of their action don't really hit in the moment. It takes time for those consequences to actually be felt. And yeah, you do kind of see that. I think it's the scene with the president in the office when he finally realizes just the impact of what he's done, like I've said. And so he did a thing where he was shooting between black and white and color. At first I thought it was supposed to indicate past and present, but actually Nolan said it represents the objective and subjective point of view. So the black and white was used when we get an objective point of view with a different character, and then color was used when we see it from Oppenheimer's point of view. And so I thought that was an interesting technique. We also get a lot of scenes, or multiple scenes, where they keep switching between Oppenheimer, and then we get these scenes of particles and just, stars, the universe, and I kind of guessed that it was supposed to be representative of what Oppenheimer was seeing, what he was seeing in his mind, what he was envisioning. So especially when he's doing this equation on the board, it switches between him writing, and then we'll get the scenes, and then he'll be writing again. So we get this look into his mind, how he visualizes it, which I do also think it kind of shows how he kind of thinks. He thinks in a more literal sense, I guess. When he's actually thinking, it's very much he's thinking about reality. He's thinking about the facts, as opposed to thinking with emotions. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but something else Nolan mentioned. He said that despite not actually publicly apologizing for the the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he does feel like Oppenheimer did feel guilt, and he wanted to portray that in the movie, and we see that he kind of dissociates with throughout the movie because of kind of the mental impact of what he's done has on him. He decided to portray Oppenheimer's affair with Jean Tetlock explicitly because it would have an enormous impact on Oppenheimer's later life. So we get this explicit sex scene, and eventually we see the impact her suicide has on him. He feels guilt because he didn't answer her when she called him like he promised he would, because she was just getting really, like, it was obviously she was becoming unhinged, and I guess he couldn't handle it, and so she eventually kills herself. But also it's her association with him that they use later on in his life to pretty much convince people that he's a communist. And that was one of the things people were bitching about online, of course, complaining that the first scene was a sex scene with them, which, oh my god, it's literally about the life of this dude, and he just happens to have an affair with, this woman. And yeah, she I guess it could say it's not, her part is relative to how much time he, impact she had on his life. So we get a lot more time with other characters, because he spent a lot more time with them. And people are complaining about, them wasting Florence Pugh. This is literally the role she auditioned for. She knew exactly how much screen time she was going to be having when she got the role, so it was just so ridiculous. People have been trying to get, find things to hate about Oppenheimer. Part of Nolan's reason for why he said he decided to do this film, he said he was actually, he was raised during the campaign for nuclear disarmament, and he was alive during the anti-nuclear protest in RAF Greenham Common. And so this was one of his fears growing up as a child, was nuclear war. So he states that as part of the reason he decided to do this movie. And also current events, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, kind of has stirred up those fears again. So Nolan sought out Murphy for the role of Oppenheimer. And once Murphy read this, was ecstatic about it. He immediately accepted, I guess, and he kind of read up as much as possible as he could about Oppenheimer to really understand his character. Most of the actors who end up getting the roles did not know what roles they were applying for until they finally got them. So obviously this movie was very hush-hush. I mean, I'm sure you remember when, past year or two, how every few weeks there would be revealed that someone else was cast in the role for Nolan's movie, and people were joking about how, he's cast half of Hollywood in his movie so far. Turns out Robert Downey Jr., Matt Damon, and Emily Blunt took pay cuts to be in this film. Instead of taking 10 to 20 million that they usually do, they end up taking 4 million. So that should really tell you how much people wanted to be on this movie, or how much they wanted to work with Nolan, because they're willing to take cuts to be in it. Matt Damon actually was thinking about taking a break from acting following negotiations with his wife in couples therapy, and thus Nolan had hired him for this film. So apparently, I guess he's been having troubles with his wife, and he was thinking about taking a break until he got offered the role for this movie. And then Nolan advised the composer for this movie to use the violin for Oppenheimer's central theme in the film. And the composer remarked he felt it go from the most romantic, beautiful tone in a split second to neurotic and heart-wrenching horror sounds. So yes, that's very much what happens. Especially, like I said, during the scene where he's like imagining people's faces melting off. So yeah, so that was a lot about like some facts about what happened behind the scenes in the creation of this movie. Just my thoughts on the movie overall. My favorite character was probably, besides, Emily Blunt's character, Einstein, of all people. He felt like the kindly old mentor to Oppenheimer. He felt like the old grandpa that you'd love to hang out with. He gives one of my favorite lines where Oppenheimer is talking about how his country is treating him and how much he loves his country, and Einstein's like, "You should tell them to go to hell." It was just so enjoyable. Because Einstein, he's not involved in the Manhattan Project. He doesn't want to be involved in it. He kind of, I guess you could say, he's handing the reins over to the next generations of physicists, and so. He's more of a mentor to Oppenheimer in this movie. He was actually in America when the war started, and because obviously Hitler's anti-Semitism, he decided to stay in America. He is the one who sent a letter to Roosevelt warning him that the Germans were going to start creating the bombs, and so the Americans should start creating them as well, because he knew that really no other choice. He supported the Allies, but he hated the idea of nuclear weapons. And so yeah, one of my favorite characters in the movie. So yeah, I think that was all about the movie. I'd probably have to watch it again just to pick up on things that I missed, because there's a lot of information, especially at the end where there's, the whole herring and everything like this. I know I missed a bunch. There's probably references throughout the movie I missed, because the final scene is a scene that happens earlier in the movie, except we see it from another character's point of view. At the end of the movie, we actually hear it was a scene with him and Einstein talking. We actually see what the scene with him and Einstein was, what they were actually talking about. And in the scene, he pretty much says that he thinks they've created a chain reaction, and he's visualizing that Earth is going to be consumed by nuclear war. So, where does this rank in my Nolan movies? To be honest, I'll be honest, I've only seen Interstellar. Man of Steel, he wrote that, helped write that and produce it, and I like Man of Steel better than this movie. Interstellar, I liked Interstellar better than this movie, probably because Interstellar was more, I guess it was more like thought-provoking for me, because we're actually dealing with time travel, and it makes me curious to go actually read about time travel, because I believe physicists have said that time travel is theoretically possible, and so it's just made me curious to go read it, and I love reading about space and stuff like that. This one, it was more of a character study, and so I think that's why I didn't really like it. Or it didn't really touch me as much. Interstellar had the relationship between Murphy, ironically. The guy's daughter was named Murphy. And, Murphy and her father. And that was heart-wrenching for me. And that's why I loved the movie so much. I think that's why this movie, Oppenheimer, just wasn't as touching to me. But I can acknowledge it's a well done movie, and the acting was good. So yeah, if you want to go watch this movie, I would definitely go watch it. I watched it in on the grand screen in my theater. I'm sure if I want to, I can go find a theater that does it in IMAX. I'm not sure what the difference between IMAX and the screen I saw it on, but if you're wanting to see it, just go see it as on the biggest screen possible to get the full effects. So yeah, so that was my review of Oppenheimer. So if you did like this review, get a like, subscribe to get notification for all the videos I'll be doing. You guys have a nice night. Stay safe out there. I'll talk to you later. Bye.